Welcome to the command line interface, Keystone Lab. My name is Gonzalo de la Torre, and I will be training you in performing administrative actions in this service using the command line interface. Table of contents. During this lab, we will be covering the following topics: accessing your OpenStack environment, authentication, tenants, roles, users, and at the end, this summary of commands, and the reference. Prerequisites. In order to take this lab, you must have previously gone through the Introduction to Cloud Computing lab, as well as the Horizon Dashboard, Keystone as an admin, and the Horizon Dashboard, Keystone as a user labs. Keystone Identity Service is used to identify and authenticate users and projects or tenants. Accessing your OpenStack environment. Let us first open a terminal window to connect to our OpenStack environment. In this case, we have proceeded to install OpenStack using DevStack in an all-in-one node. The three things you will require to connect to your environment are the user, IP address of your OpenStack environment, private key corresponding to the public key provided during the instance creation. In your terminal, you can access your OpenStack environment by typing SSH and then the path indicating where your private key is, as well as the user, which in this case is CC, at, and then the IP address where your OpenStack environment is. Now that we have accessed our OpenStack environment, the first thing we need to do is to authenticate our OpenStack user credentials. To do so, let's change to the DevStack directory. In this case, I have cloned this directory into my home folder. To access it, we must type cd space and then indicate the directory of DevStack, which has been saved in our home directory. Now we're in this directory, we need to source our credentials as an admin user and admin tenant by typing source space openrc space admin space admin. When you source your credentials, you're requesting Keystone to provide you with a token that will allow you to work with the OpenStack service clients. These clients give you the ability to operate the command line interface for each one of these. In this case, let us use the Keystone command line interface to obtain information on the token being used for the admin user and admin tenant. To obtain this, let us type keystone space token-get. As we can observe on the output, the current user token has an expiration date, an ID, and is specific to a particular tenant and user, in this case, admin and admin. Tenants. By default, whenever installing OpenStack using DevStack, a series of default tenants will be created. Within those, the admin tenant and the demo tenant. We will focus our exercises on using the admin tenant to manipulate, create, or delete other tenants. To get a list of tenants using Keystone, we can use the command keystone space tenant-list. In the output, we will be able to obtain information for each tenant, such as the tenant ID, tenant name, and information on whether the tenant is enabled or disabled for usage. Let us say that we would like to obtain more information on the admin tenant. We can use the command keystone space tenant-get space and the tenant ID. You can also provide the tenant name instead of the tenant ID. This command will provide you with additional properties information of this tenant. As an example, whenever we requested a list of tenants, the description property was not displayed as it is in this case. This property is filled out by the admin during the creation of a tenant or while editing. To create a new tenant, you can use the command keystone space tenant dash create space dash dash name space and the name of the tenant, which in this case we will state it as OCI. The keystone tenant create command only requires a tenant name of your liking to create it. Nevertheless, you can pass to this command additional parameters like description of the tenant or define to enable or disable the tenant to be created by giving the options of true or false. As an example, you can type the following command: keystone space tenant dash create space dash dash name space OCI2 space dash dash description double quotes the description that you want for your tenant, which in this case is gonna be OCI space tenant double quotes space dash dash enabled space true. If by any reason you would like to update the information on any tenant, you can use the command keystone space tenant dash update space and the tenant ID. There are different parameters that can be used to update the tenant, such as the tenant's name, tenant's description, or set the enable flag to true or false. As an example, let us update our recently created tenant. To do so, we can type keystone space tenant dash update space dash dash name to provide a new name to the tenant, and we will give the new name that we want, space dash dash description, and we will empty out the description, space dash dash enable space false space, and then the tenant ID that we want to update. To validate the updates, you can type keystone space tenant dash list. As you can see, our tenant has been updated. By default, whenever installing OpenStack using DevStack, a series of default roles will be created. Within those, the admin role, the user role, and the service role. To get a list of tenants using Keystone, we can use the command keystone space role dash list. The output will display a list of current roles and their corresponding ID. The Keystone service has its own role access policies. These policies determine which user can access which objects, in which way, and are defined in the service policy JSON file. Whenever an API call to an OpenStack service is made, the service policy engine uses the appropriate policy definitions to determine if the call can be accepted. Any changes to the policy JSON file are effective immediately, which allows new policies to be implemented while the service is running. The Keystone policy file can be found on -etc-keystone-policy.json. Let's say that we would like to create a new role. We can use the command keystone space role dash create space dash dash name space and then the name of the role that we want to give it. As an example, my role. If you want to get detailed information about the role we just created, we can use the command keystone space role dash get followed by the role ID. If we want to get detailed information about the role we just created, we can use the command keystone space role dash get space and the role ID. This information is the same one that is displayed when you just created the role. To delete the role, we can use the command keystone space role dash delete space and then the role ID. To validate this, we can use Keystone space role-list. Users. In this section, I will be showing you how to manage operations on users, which include listing users, creating users, getting user information, deleting user, change a user's password, list user roles, add a role to the user, remove a role from the user, and update a user's information. To obtain a list of current users, we can use the command Keystone space user-list. In a default OpenStack installation using DevStack, multiple users will be created, such as admin user, demo users, and users for the installed OpenStack services. Let me show how you can create a new user. To create a new user, let us type the command Keystone user create. Let me show you how you can create a new user. To create a new user, let us type the command Keystone space user-create. You will notice that this command will give us an error, since it requires us to pass additional arguments. The only required argument this Keystone command requests is the -- name. Arguments such as tenant, pass, email, enabled are optional. Let us look a little bit deeper into these commands and see how they work. Let us assume that we want to create a new user that is assigned to the demo tenant, give the password of my password, and we want this user to be enabled immediately. To perform such action, we need to use the command Keystone space user-create space -- name space the name that we want to give the user, which is new user, space -- tenant space, and then the tenant that we want to assign this user to, which in this case we'll use demo, space -- pass space, and the password we want to give, which is my password, space -- enabled space true. By pressing enter, a box containing different information properties of the new user will be shown. These properties are email, enabled, user ID, username, tenant ID, and the name of the user. If we want to get this same information for any other user, we could use the command Keystone space user-get space and the user ID. To give a new password to the user, we can use the command Keystone space user-password -update space -- pass space the new password. To give a new password to the user, we can use Keystone space user-password -update space -- pass space the new password space and the user ID. To list the roles assigned to a particular user, we can use the command Keystone space user-role-list. To add a new role to a user, we can type the command Keystone space user-role-add space -- user space indicate the user to which we want to assign a new role space -- role space the type of role that we want to assign to this user space -- tenant space and the tenant for this particular user. To remove a role from a user, we can use Keystone space user-role-remove space -- user space the name of the user space -- role space the name of the role, space, dash tenant, space, demo. With this, we have removed the previous role that we assigned to this particular user. To update a user's information, you can use Keystone space user-update space and then the parameters that you wish to update. In this case, we want to update the name, the email, and the enabled status. To validate the update of this information, we can use the command Keystone space user-get space followed by the user ID. As you can see, the information of this particular user has been updated along with its name, which is now super user. Finally, to delete a user, we can use the command Keystone space user-delete space and the ID of that particular user. To validate that the user has been deleted, we can use the command Keystone space user-list. We can observe that the super user is no longer listed. Summary. In this tutorial, we have covered how to perform some operations using the Keystone command line interface. Some of the operations include create lists, update lists, create and delete tenants, create and delete roles, and create and delete users. This is a summary of commands that we use during this lab. Follow-up. Please continue your learning by accessing the labs on the command line interface in Glance, Nova, Neutron, Cinder, and Swift. These are the references used to cover this lab.